close my eyes at night and hope that I will dream to get me out this place and onto better things. Because I tried so hard and got so far to let this slip away, and I refuse to let someone put out my flame. You gotta drive my charger, hold me underwater, and you can make it darker, 'cause I will burn it all up, 'cause I'm a fire starter.
Now, you did the seven words you can't say. Is there anything you can't say now?
I don't know.
That gets people.
I got what I like to do. I like to bother people. I like to find out where the line is, sort of sense where the line is drawn, and then deliberately cross it, and drag the audience with you, and have them happy that you did it. That's the key. Once you get them over there, they say that was good. So. I'm doing my next HBO a year from December, about 13 months from now, and I'm just working on things because like there's one taboo in this country, I think, religion, and I really am all out attacking religion every chance I get because I just don't believe in that stuff. I think it's the worst thing that ever happened to mankind, and I get after them all the time. But that's not the only thing. Kids in this country, there's too much attention to children in this country. Every time you turn around, it's kids, and they're hiding behind kids because all they're trying to do is censor you again and take your drugs away in the name of their kids, in the name of the kids. They're trying to roll back the 60s, man.
And that's actually an anomaly for a pop artist. You realize that, right? And I mean, you do mention, though, going against Obama.
My fight against terrorism, to me, the biggest terrorist is Obama in the United States of America. So for me, it's like I'm trying to fight the terrorism that's actually causing the other forms of terrorism. The root causes of the terrorism is the stuff that the U.S. government allows to happen, and the foreign policies that we have in place in different countries that inspire people to become terrorists. And it's easy for us because it's really just some oil, which we can really get on our own.
Each passing year has seen our estimate of the probability of life in space increase, along with our capabilities of detecting it. More and more scientists feel that contact with other civilizations is no longer something beyond our dreams, but is a natural event in the history of mankind.
I don't think we should wait until the encounter occurs, but that we should do all in our power to prepare ourselves for it. The manner in which we first meet may determine the character of all our subsequent relations. Let us never forget the fatal impact we've had upon innumerable peoples on this earth, peoples of our own species who trusted us, befriended us, and who we destroyed by our thoughtlessness and insensitivity to their needs and their vulnerabilities. The simple truth is that before we can communicate with others successfully, we must first learn to communicate with ourselves successfully, and we're a long way from having achieved that. Perhaps that is where we ought to begin, with ourselves.
But the whole country's got a fucked up mentality, man. We all got a gang mentality. Republicans are fucking idiots, and Democrats are fucking idiots, and conservatives are idiots, and liberals are idiots, and anyone that makes up their mind before they hit an issue is a fucking fool, okay? Everybody. No. Everybody's so busy wanting to be down with a gang. I'm a conservative, I'm liberal, I'm conservative. It's bullshit. Be a fucking person. Listen. Let it swirl around your head. Then form your opinion. No normal, decent person is one thing, okay? I got some shit I'm conservative about. I got some shit I'm liberal about. Crime.
And that's actually an anomaly for a pop artist. You realize that, right? And I mean, you do mention, though, going against Obama.
My fight against terrorism, to me, the biggest terrorist is Obama in the United States of America. So for me, it's like I'm trying to fight the terrorism that's actually causing the other forms of terrorism. The root causes of the terrorism is the stuff that the U.S. government allows to happen, and the foreign policies that we have in place in different countries that inspire people to become terrorists, and it's easy for us because it's really just some oil, which we can really get on our own.
And I tried hard to be proud of my service, but all I could feel was shame. And racism could no longer mask the reality of the occupation. These were people, these were human beings. I've since been plagued by guilt anytime I see an elderly man, like the one who couldn't walk, who we rolled onto a stretcher and told the Iraqi police to take him away. I feel guilt anytime I see a mother with her children, like the one who cried hysterically and screamed that we are worse than Saddam as we forced her from her home. I feel guilt anytime I see a young girl, like the one I grabbed by the arm and dragged into the street. We were told we were fighting terrorists. The real terrorist was me, and the real terrorism is this occupation. Racism within the military has long been an important tool to justify the destruction and occupation of another country. It has long been used to justify the killing, subjugation, and torture of another people. Racism is a vital weapon employed by this government. It is a more important weapon than a rifle, a tank, a bomber, or a battleship. It is more destructive than an artillery shell, or a bunker buster, or a Tomahawk missile. While all those weapons are created and owned by this government, they are harmless without people willing to use them. Those who send us to war do not have to pull a trigger or lob a mortar round. They do not have to fight the war, they merely have to sell the war. They need a public who is willing to send their soldiers into harm's way. They need soldiers who are willing to kill and be killed without question. They can spend millions on a single bomb, but that bomb only becomes a weapon when the ranks of the military are willing to follow orders to use it. They can send every last soldier anywhere on Earth, but there will only be a war if soldiers are willing to fight. And the ruling class, the billionaires who profit from human suffering, care only about expanding their wealth, controlling the world economy. Understand that their power lies only in their ability to convince us that war, oppression, and exploitation is in our interest. They understand that their wealth is dependent on their ability to convince the working class to die to control the market of another country. And convincing us to kill and die is based on their ability to make us think that we are somehow superior. Soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen have nothing to gain from this occupation. The vast majority of people living in the U.S. have nothing to gain from this occupation. In fact, not only do we have nothing to gain, but we suffer more because of it. We lose limbs, endure trauma, and give our lives. Our families have to watch flag-draped coffins lowered into the earth. Millions in this country without health care, jobs, or access to education must watch this government squander over $450 million a day on this occupation. Poor and working people in this country are sent to kill poor and working people in another country to make the rich richer. And without racism, soldiers would realize that they have more in common with the Iraqi people than they do with the billionaires who send us to war. I threw families onto the street in Iraq, only to come home and find families thrown onto the street in this country, in this tragic and unnecessary foreclosure crisis. We need to wake up and realize that our real enemies are not in some distant land. They're not people whose names we don't know and cultures we don't understand. The enemy is people we know very well and people we can identify. The enemy is a system that wages war when it's profitable. The enemy is the CEOs who lay us off from our jobs when it's profitable. It's the insurance companies who deny us health care when it's profitable. It's the banks who take away our homes when it's profitable. Our enemy is not 5,000 miles away. They are right here at home. If we organize and fight with our sisters and brothers, we can stop this war, we can stop this government, and we can create a better world.
The worst thing to call somebody is crazy, is dismissive. I don't understand this person, so they're crazy. That's bullshit. These people are not crazy, they're strong people. Maybe the environment is a little sick.
Now, if you believe that there's global warming and that you have to save the Earth from what man is doing, you have to accept a couple of things. Number one, you have to accept that man-made global warming and the production of CO2 is the predominant factor on climate change. Then you also have to accept the fact that even though climate change models predicted that we would have global warming if CO2 went up, that hasn't happened. CO2 has gone up, and for 17 years, temperatures have gone down. Therefore, their model is, as we say in the computer business, garbage in, garbage out. Now, Stephen Colbert had a climatologist, David Keith, on his show, and they talked about climate engineering. And this is very interesting because they hit on chemtrails, and they also hit on the fact that this is something that has been talked about for quite some time by scientists.
The worst way to make decisions about this would be if we all agree that we won't talk about it in polite society, we suppress it, which is basically what had been happening.
Maybe it's happening already. You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes with the contrails, maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now, and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
Seems extremely unlikely.
That the United States is not telling something to its citizens? That seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper.
Now, in that clip, David Keith said the worst thing that would happen would be if scientists would agree that they were going to suppress information about climate change. And that's exactly what they have been doing. Listen to what he said earlier in the interview. He said, this is actually an old idea, climate engineering, known since President Johnson and the scientific community mostly decided not to talk about it. Well, that's what we've been telling you for quite some time. Well, that's what we've been telling you, that this has been going on since the Vietnam War. And this kind of follows the same pattern that we've seen with the N.A.S.A. They do this all the time. First of all, they ridicule the idea as being totally impossible. Then they come in with step two and they say, well, technically it's feasible, but we're not doing it. We would never do it. Then they come in with phase three, which says, yeah, we've been doing it all along and there's nothing you can do about it. And of course, it's for your safety anyway. So that's what we kind of see rolling out here. It's an amazing interview. Take a look at it. Go to Infowars.com, read the article, and watch the full clip. Very interesting.
Venom of snakes is under their lips. Their mouths are full of bitterness and curses. And in their paths, nothing but ruin and misery. And the fear of God is not before their eyes. They have taken the hearts and minds of our leaders. They have recruited the rich and the powerful. And they have blinded us to the truth. And our human spirit is corrupted. Why do we worship greed? Because outside the limit of our sight, feeding off us, perched on top of us from birth to death, are our owners. Our owners. They have us. They control us. They are our masters. Wake up. They're all about you, all around you.
Well, I know some people don't like you to talk about those things. I know that. Some people don't like you to mention certain things. Some people don't want you to say this. Some people don't want you to say that. Some people think if you mention some things, they might happen. Some people are really fucking stupid. Did you ever notice that? How many really stupid people you run into during the day? God damn, there's a lot of stupid bastards walking around. Carry a little pad and pencil with you. You wind up with 30 or 40 names by the end of the day. Look at it this way. Think of how stupid the average person is, and then realize half of them are stupider than that. And it doesn't take you very long to spot one of them, does it? Take you about 8 seconds. You'll be listening to some guy. You say, this guy is fucking stupid. Then there are some people, they're not stupid, they're full of shit. That doesn't take very long to spot either, does it? Take you about the same amount of time. You'll be listening to some guy and say, well, he's fairly intelligent. He's full of shit. Then there are some people, they're not stupid, they're not full of shit,
They're fucking nuts! Dan Quayle is all three! All three! Stupid, full of shit, and fucking nuts!
And I suppose you can see why there might have been some debate, because from here, the Earth certainly looks flat. Now, everybody knows that it's round. But how do you know? You know because someone told you. And I suppose if you really think that seeing is believing, then you would have had to wait until we left our planet, journeyed off into space, turned around and took a picture to see our beautiful spherical Earth in all its glory.
This is the first ever photograph taken from space of the Earth, fully illuminated by the sun. Taken in 1972 by the Apollo 17 astronauts as they travelled to the moon, it became the most viewed image in history and was named the Blue Marble.
Well, the premise is that the moon landings were impossible in the 1960s, so like having a bad hand in poker, they bluffed. They pretended to go to make the Soviets think we were more advanced than they were. It also was a good pep rally during the Vietnam War. Nixon said that the civil unrest because of the Vietnam War was destroying America. This gave us something positive to think about. If you think about the other alleged conspiracies in the world, whether it's JFK who killed them or 9/11, those, it doesn't really matter who did it, it's negative anyway. A president died regardless of who did it. 3,000 people died regardless of who did it. This, on the other hand, is a positive conspiracy. It helped everyone feel good, feel positive. So to take that away from people makes them angry. The very simple fact is, if we had the ability to go to the moon with 1960s technology on the very first attempt, there would be bases there by now. The fact is, we cannot leave Earth orbit nearly 50 years later. If I said, Richie, hey, I did cold fusion, but I can't repeat it for 50 years, come back. Would you believe I did it in the first place?
Now, there are people, Bart, who say that the reason they've not gone back is because of the enormous cost of it. The idea was to get there before the Russians, as you quite rightly said. They managed that. Not going back since the 1970s is because it would be enormously expensive these days.
Well, right now the Defense Department spends about $3 billion a day in wars and bases all around the world. So I don't think money is an issue at all. Technology does not go backwards. For example, when Columbus sailed to the New World, within a few years, everybody was sailing to the New World. When Lewis and Clark went west, within a few years, everybody went west. So to say that we went to the moon, walking on the moon, the very first time we tried with 1960s technology, and then 50 years later, a half a century, not a single nation on Earth can repeat the event, that is absurd.
But Bart, there are those who say that they tracked it. Madrid had an Apollo station. And
you really like it, don't you? You're the one who said you walked on the moon when you didn't. Calling the kettle black, if I ever thought of it. Saying I misrepresented myself. Away from me. You're a coward and a liar and a thief.
You want me to knock you in the head?
Well, I want you to swear to God on the Bible that you walked on the moon.
Okay.
If you walked on the moon, we're given the opportunity to swear to God that you walked on the moon.
I'm going to give you the opportunity to get the hell knocked out of you if you don't leave me alone.
So why don't you just put the end to the record in the argument and put your hand on the Bible, swear to God you walked on the moon.
Mr. Cybro, knowing you, that's probably a fake Bible.
Well, you're talking to the wrong guy. Why don't you talk to the administrator at NASA? We're passengers. We're guys going on a flight.
I don't hit people, but you're going to be on the deck unless you get...
I'm heading out. I appreciate it.
And get the hell out of the house.
It's okay. Well, take your stuff and get the fuck out. Why don't you quote me and say it's bullshit?
And the shadows in the wrong place. I don't give a damn about all that shit.
You're full of shit. Of lunar orbit being falsified.
Being falsified?
Correct. We got an unedited tape from a source at the Johnson Space Center.
Totally nonsense.
Mr. Seibel, you do not deserve answers.
If you show this publicly, you're open for a lawsuit. Okay?
Bart, it's fair to say you don't research this issue like you have, but I've always found it strange, Bart, is that they brought back so many rocks. They brought back over 300 kilograms of rocks. I've never understood that. It's an enormous amount of stuff to bring back. And it would have had to have caused some difficulty in carrying that amount of weight back with them.
Well, if you go do a Google search and do Dutch fake moon rock, you will see that in 1969, Neil Armstrong gave to the prime minister, I guess, of Amsterdam, or whatever that is, the Netherlands, and he gave him a moon rock. Well, after my film came out, that rock has been sitting in a hermetically sealed box for more than 40 years. After seeing my film, the museum curator decided to open it up and put it under a microscope. It proved to be a fake. It was a piece of petrified wood.
And can that be proved? I mean, are they saying that?
It's an absolute proven fact. You can look it up on the internet. It says Dutch fake moon rock, and NASA had no explanation. Now, if Neil Armstrong personally went to the moon, personally retrieved a rock, personally gave it to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and then they finally opened it up, they assumed it would never be opened up, and it proves to be a forgery, a piece of petrified wood, unless there's trees growing on the moon, right? It's a fake, and no one has the sense to connect the dots. If the moon rocks are fake, what about
everything else? Hey, Bart, we're just about out of time on it. Lovely to chat with you again. Thanks for coming on. It's a fascinating one, Bart. People can find you at Sibrel.com and get onto YouTube and watch the movie and make your mind up for yourself. It's a brilliant story, Bart. Thanks for coming on and talking to us.
No problem, Richie. You take care.
Talk to you again. Bart Sibrel there.
These boots are made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you. Yeah. You keep lying when you ought to be truthing, and you keep losing when you ought to not bet. You keep saying when you ought to be a-changing. Now what's right is right, but you ain't been right yet.
Just to wind up this little group of complaints, finally, this is a group of social criminals. These people in the space program. N.A.S.A.holes, I call them.
On May 11, 2013, 2 ISS astronauts successfully completed a spacewalk to fix a coolant leak. Spacewalks, technically called extravehicular activity, or EVA, are the finest examples of human innovation and courage. Here are 5 incredible aspects about a spacewalk according to NASA. Number 5. You might get in trouble with cops for driving over 60 to 70 miles per hour. Now imagine going at 17,227 miles an hour. That's the average speed of the International Space Station when astronauts get out of their protective environment inside the space station to perform a spacewalk. Number 4. The temperatures that astronauts face during a spacewalk could range from 250 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on their position. What's the temperature like in your neck of the woods today? Number 3. For a typical spacewalk, astronauts may utilize anywhere from 70 to 110 tools. Number 2. It takes about 45 minutes to put on a spacesuit, and before heading out, the astronauts breathe pure oxygen for more than an hour. By the way, putting on a spacesuit is called donning, and taking it off is called doffing. Number 1. Susan J. Helms and James S. Voss hold the current record at 8 hours, 56 minutes for the longest spacewalk. How do you like the idea of being out in space for almost 9 hours, traveling at thousands of miles per hour?
The belief that men actually walked on the moon is shared by the vast majority of the world's population. There are no high-profile scientists, astronauts, or officials that have openly expressed any doubt as to the reality of this alleged accomplishment. The only exception to this is former United States President William Jefferson Clinton. In his autobiography, My Life, published in 2004, he states on page 156, Just a month before, Apollo 11 astronauts Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong had left their colleague Michael Collins aboard Spaceship Columbia and walked on the moon, beating by 5 months President Kennedy's goal of putting a man on the moon before the decade was out. The old carpenter asked me if I really believed it had happened. I said sure, I saw it on television. He disagreed. He said that he didn't believe it for a minute, that them television fellers could make things look real that weren't. Back then I thought he was a crank. During my 8 years in Washington, I saw some things on TV that made me wonder if he wasn't ahead of his time. To simplify, what Clinton says is that a gentleman expressed doubt in the Apollo claims, and he wonders whether that gentleman was correct. Now, exactly what is a former two-term United States president doing, wondering about the authenticity of the greatest technological achievement in the history of mankind? An event that had marked the legacy of his own boyhood hero, JFK. The most common question asked is how so many people could have been kept quiet about it. One wonders too why the astronauts would go along with such an elaborate hoax. To answer this question, we must all return to World War II Germany. Under Adolf Hitler's leadership, a Nazi war criminal named Wernher von Braun built thousands of V-2 rockets through slave labor that were launched against London.
Once the rockets are up, who cares where they come down? That's not my department, says Wernher von Braun. Some have harsh words for this man of renown, but some think our attitude should be one of gratitude, like the widows and cripples in old London town, who owe their large pensions to Wernher von Braun.
After the war, the Soviets and the Americans divided up the rocket technology. The Americans brought home over 100 top Nazi propulsion specialists, including their leading rocket scientist, von Braun.
Say rather that he's apolitical.
Since most people wanted to come live in America, the Soviet Union was given most of the hardware, which, to a large degree, contributed to their victory with Sputnik.
In German or English, I know how to count down. And I'm learning Chinese, says Wernher von Braun.
By 1961, Nazi rocket scientists such as von Braun maintained a close relationship with President John F. Kennedy as he moved to fulfill his promise to land Americans on the moon before the end of 1969. In 1953, von Braun wrote a book on how to get to the moon titled Conquest of the Moon. On page 14 of his book, he states, "It is commonly believed that man will fly directly from the Earth to the moon, but to do this, we would require a vehicle of such gigantic proportions that it would prove an economic impossibility. It would have to develop sufficient speed to penetrate the atmosphere and overcome the Earth's gravity, and, having traveled all the way to the moon, it must still have enough fuel to land safely and make the return trip to Earth. Furthermore, in order to give the expedition a margin of safety, we would not use one ship alone, but a minimum of 3. Calculations have been carefully worked out on the type of vehicle we would need for the non-stop flight from the Earth to the moon in return. The figures speak for themselves. Each rocket ship would be taller than New York's Empire State Building, 1,250 feet, and weigh about 10 times the tonnage of the Queen Mary, or some 800,000 tons. The Apollo program's 3-stage Saturn V was only 3,000 tons.
Had a little company, used to be in America, called NASA, standing for National Air Space Exploration. Take my word for it, niggas, it stood for going up there. Look at white people, that is not what it stood for at all. That would be N.A.S.A. We don't know what he's talking about. Fact of the matter is, NASA used to report to us, let us know what the fuck they was doing. And for 40 years, they spent $500 million a year sending space shuttles up, bringing them back down. And they used to let us see them when they took off. And then when they landed, we'd be right there and we'd say, show us what you got. Then they started doing sneaky shit. Taking off the space shuttles at 3 o'clock in the goddamn morning and shit. landing them in the middle of the night, and if ain't nobody looking, they just walk off. Just shh.
Seated, 3, 2, 1, ignition. On our way, Houston. Vector grid. Ag start. Yes, that's right.
The last alleged mission to the moon was Apollo 17, which NASA says took place in December of 1972. Since then, absolutely no country claims to have sent astronauts or even animals more than 400 miles above the surface of the Earth. In recent years, space shuttle astronauts completed a trip wherein they attained a maximum altitude of 365 miles. Normally, the space shuttle orbits at an altitude of approximately 200 miles from the Earth, the same orbit altitude of the International Space Station. Now, you might be asking, why exactly is this maximum distance from Earth relevant to our discussion? Well, let's put it this way. The Moon is 240,000 miles away from the Earth. The diameter of the Earth is 8,000 miles. This puts the Moon at about 30 Earth diameters away. In relation to the space shuttle's orbit on this scale, it has never traveled more than 1/2 of 1 inch away from the Earth's surface.
Six, 5, 3 main engines up and burning, 2, 1, and liftoff.
Just getting into orbit is no small feat, as is illustrated by the fact that in all of recorded history, only 3 countries, the United States, China, and Russia, have been able to put a human just into orbit and never being more than 400 miles from Earth. The explanation for this has always been that, except for these 3 countries, every other country in the world has been too cheap and lazy to venture into just Earth orbit. In reality, the reason has to do with the difficulty in accomplishing this. This most of all drives home the point that NASA's claim of sending men on a 240,000-mile trip in 1969, some 600 times further than they can send men today, is just not plausible. One reason the space shuttle has not been sent beyond 400 miles into space has to do with the Earth's magnetism.